Hello everyone, I'm back, this time with a different video. I've got it in the bag, and it's my latest version of course, and it's going to be a little bit different. I'm putting it in more controlled circumstances inside where I can control the elements a little bit better, not have to worry about traffic and other things outside for distractions. But I just wanted to show you essentially everything that I'm bagging typically when I go out, whenever I bring this bag, which is a more complete setup than what I've been using previously, where I take like a bag that holds 10 discs and has a couple of pockets and I don't get to carry as much. But considering I'm a disc golf YouTuber and the bulk of what I carry has to all fit in a backpack to make it easier for me to go from place to place, that's essentially why I'm using this bag. First thing you may notice is this is the Innova Excursion Pack, and this is a relatively new bag by Innova, and I decided to upgrade my Adventure Pack, the first generation of that, to this rather than go to the second generation of the Adventure Pack, because this is a little more sturdy, has other features, and I do plan on doing a review of this backpack in the future. That said, let me go through my loadout first. This is all the discs I typically carry, even though I may not use every single one of them in any round, but I carry basically these. So I'm going to start out first with the putters, and it's basically ranged from putters all the way to drivers, but we're going to go ahead with my putting putter, which is my Aviar. All my discs are in max weight, so typically 175 grams for the drivers and putters, and the mid-ranges are typically 180 grams. But my primary putting putter, I do it for some approaches for under 100 feet, but I almost always use it for putting within circle 1 and circle 2, or approaches just to get it close to the basket, if I'm within 100 feet. The next thing I have, let me move this out of the way a little bit, is another putter. This is my AviarX3, whereas this is in DX plastic. Every other disc that I have is going to be in a more premium plastic from at least XT or better. So this is my Aviar3 in XT plastic, and it's just a tiny bit more grippy and a bit more durable than the DX Aviar. This is a little more overstable, and this is the first of my approach discs. I actually love putters and approach discs, but this is a really good one. It's decently stable. I would say it's overstable, but not dramatically so. My AviarX3 in Champion plastic, however, is significantly more stable than the Aviar3, and both of these are point and shoot. You can basically grab them like this or like this, and it's real easy because of the flat top and the nature of and shape of the disc, you know, to throw them. But I'm always going to be throwing these relatively short range, like 120, 100 feet or less, basically. But those are essentially some of my approach discs. And one disc that has returned to my bag is the Dart. This is also an XT plastic. This was something I picked up about a month ago, and it had a stamp on it I didn't like. It's a stock stamp, but it was rainbow colored, and it's really hard to see what it was. So anytime I buy a disc where it's like an X out or factory 2, factory second disc, I typically use acetone to wipe the label off, and then I label it myself. And so the reason why I label it like this with a Sharpie, because it's cheap, it's free basically, but it's also something that's easy to see on camera, which as a disc golf YouTuber, it's just easier for me to just do this, show the camera before I throw it. But I love this approach disc. I use it, it was one of the first discs that I bought in a DX plastic a couple years ago, and I used it a lot. I took it out of my bag because the way I started throwing would turn these over too much, but I've gotten a better control over how I throw, and I use light hyzers more often, and that allows us to go straight when needed. But this is my straight approach disc that I use typically 150 feet and in. So if anywhere between 70 and 140 feet is likely when that dart will come out, and sometimes maybe a little bit longer than that. The next disc I have is another approach disc. This is a Hydra R-Pro plastic, and this is a bigger disc. It's not as dense. Its weight is spread out a little bit more, and it basically floats in water. And this is actually fairly similar to the Dart in that it's relatively straight in real time, in real world usage, maybe a touch more stable than the Dart, but this is more vulnerable to turn. If you put a little bit too more power into it, it will turn, in my opinion, a little bit easier than the Dart, although it'll fade harder typically if thrown the exact same way. But for the longest time, when I took my Dart out of my bag after the Dart challenge I had with Sean, I put my Hydra in my bag in place of that as my relatively straight flying approach disc for 150 feet and in. But anyways, these are both in my bag now that I can hold more than 10 discs at a time. The next and final approach disc that I use, it, in my opinion, borders between approach disc or mid-range. I would consider this a mid-range as well, because the thickness of the rim is actually thicker than many mid-ranges. So the rim thickness or wing length is very similar to the mid-ranges I'm going to show you next. But this is my Pig in Pro plastic. It's a 2019 Riki Wysocki Pig. It's very stable, very overstable, I think is technically what you would call it. And this is my most reliable or most trustworthy putter. This is the one that I use for approaches the most, and if you've been watching any of my videos, you will recognize this disc more than most discs in my bag outside of like my Aviar and a couple of my drivers. My favorite approach disc, bar none, not that I dislike any of them, but this is just simply my favorite. I actually love all of these discs. Now that I'm outside of the world of putters, and I'm going to go ahead and move this over here, I'm going to go into mid-ranges. And I used to carry, and you'll notice all these are from straight to very overstable in terms of putters. That logic is also used in my mid-ranges. I no longer have understable mid-ranges like the Manta or the Foxbat. Those are no longer in my bag. As much as I like the Manta, I just haven't been using it that often. I tend to prefer a stable or straight disc like my Mako3, which is what this is, and this is in Star plastic. Whereas all these are in DX, XT, or R-Pro or Pro plastic, some variant of Pro or XT plastic. Everything here is pretty much premium plastic, mostly Star, occasionally Champion plastic. But this is my Star Mako3. It's a straight flying disc. I very much like this disc. It's my favorite mid-range because it's very true, and it tells me what I'm doing right and wrong when I throw it, and I know that if it ends up fading too hard or turning, that I did something wrong with it. But it's really easy to determine what I did wrong because it is so straight. And this, like my other mid-ranges, I use from about 100 feet to about 200 feet. That tends to be my range. This is also the farthest flying mid-range I've ever thrown. I've gotten this something like 265, 270 feet, something like that, which is as far as I've gotten most of my drivers. So definitely good for distance, definitely good for a straight shot, for tunnels, for approaching the basket from a decent distance without having it fade hard or turning. Very reliable, very trustworthy, but straight. And one thing I will note is I use backhand and forehand for every single disc. I do not have a preference for discs for backhand and forehand. The very first disc that I threw that I started getting comfortable with throwing forehand, in the last year is actually the Dart, because the way it feels when I use my forehand for it is really good. And this is a great training tool for throwing. So that's where this has a special place in my heart. But every disc that I have, I throw backhand and forehand. I don't have a preference in terms of what I use. I don't pick and choose. I don't have forehand discs and backhand discs. You'll also notice I don't have any duplicates of any molds. I have discrete molds using all the similar plastic for its type, so that it's easier for them to do what I need them to do, or I change the plastic based on if I need more or less stability. Anyways, from the Mako3, we're going to move on to the Atlas. This is in Star Mix plastic. I think both of these are Star plastic, but it's a great disc. It's just a little more stable than the Mako, and resists turn in the beginning of the flight a little bit better than the Mako. So it's just, if I want to but minimize the risk of turn, I will then step up a slight bit to my Atlas. And I like this disc. It's not as popular as maybe it should be, but it is a great disc that Innova makes that is good for essentially straight flight, that's a little bit more trustworthy or dependable than the Mako in terms of going straight and resisting turn. Although it doesn't resist turn dramatically, it's a little bit. Something that I used to use for my Shark 3, which I took out of my bag because it was in Champion plastic and in purple, and it was hard to see sometimes whenever I'm playing out in the course. It's hard to spot from afar, or if it's near in the shade or near shadow, it gets a little hard to see my Shark 3 in Champion plastic. The Star Lion fulfills that basically identical flight path as my Shark 3, but it's in Star plastic, which is a touch more grippy, but it's orange and it's much easier to see than the Shark 3 that I have. And I actually love the Shark 3, and in the future I do plan on buying a Shark 3, probably that's like orange or some similar yellow-orange, something that's easier to spot. But the Star Lion, even though I almost never throw it because I tend to use either the Mako or the next disc, I still have this in my bag for some shots, and I do plan on using it more as needed. The problem with that, of course, is I have the RocX3 in my bag. I absolutely love this disc. And if I'm going to throw forehand, a mid-range with my forehand, it's almost most likely going to be this disc as opposed to these other discs, even the Mako3, simply because it resists turn better. And I still have a tendency of turning, rolling over my wrist a slight bit, or causing a disc to turn, or throwing it with a little more anhyzer that's needed. And this helps to minimize my accidental mistake in doing one of those things. The RocX3 it's not, I would say it's stable, decently stable, maybe a slight overstable, but I would not put this in the very overstable category, despite what its flight numbers say, and even in the premium plastic at max weight. This is a stable disc that does fade significantly and will fight turn somewhat. But this is not dramatically more stable than the Lion, which is not dramatically more stable than the Atlas. It's not more dramatically stable than the Mako3. And that's why I only have 4 mid-ranges, whereas I have 6 putters. You know, 5 of those putters are essentially approach discs, and 1 being my putting putter. But I have 6 putters because most of them fulfill my approach role, and I can use them up to 100 feet or maybe even up to 200 if I absolutely need to. But I do have these because I trust these in the 150 to 200 foot range more, maybe upwards of 210, 220, downwards to 100 feet. That's when I might break out these mid-ranges. But these 4 mid-ranges are staples in my bag because I trust them at the greater distances. They skip a little bit more than the putters, but they travel farther, easier, because they're designed to be thrown farther and travel farther. And for someone at my relative novice skill level, I need the assistance in getting that extra distance by using mid-ranges as opposed to putters, beyond 150 feet or so. And now we're going to go towards the drivers. And we're going to start off with my favorite driver in the world, my Innova Star Leopard. Very first driver I ever had was a Discraft Express. It was like 150 grams or so in like the X plastic or whatever, and it was decent, and I was learning how to throw on it. But when I started doing research into discs from Innova, because I was trying to standardize within a brand, I went with the Leopard, and at the time I bought a 147 gram Pro Leopard, which I used for nearly a year as my primary driver. In fact, that one driver I would use more than all my other drivers combined, and at the time I had like 4 different drivers, maybe 5. But this, when I started throwing farther than 240, 250 feet, I started relying on, I bought this disc and started using it because I started turning over the Pro Leopard too easily when I was approaching more than 230 feet, 240 feet. And so I knew I needed to bump up in weight and bump up in quality so that this would resist deformity more as it hit things over time. Plus, being heavier, it would be more stable in flight and throw, travel a farther distance, a greater distance, travel farther, a greater distance as needed. So this became my primary driver, and for the longest time, several months, this would be straight for me if I threw it straight. If the release angle was roughly straight, this would fly straight, or if with very slight hyzer, it would flip up a little bit and essentially resist turn, blah, blah, blah. But long story short, this was my primary driver for the longest time. But this has hit enough trees, and I've thrown it enough times, and it's hit the ground, and et cetera, to where this has started to become, I don't want to say flippy, but when thrown straight, it definitely curves to the right as needed from my right hand backhand. And one thing I want to mention, now that I'm in driver territory, I don't use my forehand for anything beyond 200 feet anyway, so I don't use the drivers. That's where the mid-ranges come. When I use the forehand or sidearm, when I throw using that, it's almost exclusively putters and mid-ranges. I can't really get the distance with drivers with my forehand, so I don't bother for that. For any time I'm breaking out one of these drivers, it's almost exclusively for backhand. Although the first disc I will try to use with my forehand will be this Star Leopard, which again, my primary disc of choice when it comes to throwing. So I'm going to go ahead and put this down. Essentially a straight flyer for me, but it will turn to the right as needed. Since it now reliably turns for me when flown straight, and it goes in that direction for me, I've now gravitated to the Discmania FD as my primary straight flying disc. And now anytime I try to throw for max distance, this will now get me my max distance. Whereas this used to get me my max distance, the FD now will get me 5-10 feet greater distance. And even though this technically does fade a little bit harder than this at the end of its flight, it will travel farther and resist turn a little bit better than this Leopard. And so it is true to that aspect, and that is why I use this for my primary straight flying long distance drives. Absolutely love that disc. It's in S-line plastic, which is the Star plastic in the Discmania line. Now let's go to my TL. And as you'll notice, this has the Sharpie on it with the TL. This was an X out. I bought it for like $10 online. I think I maybe even got it for free because I think I used points from Infinite Discs, which is where I bought this from, to get this for free. I can't recall. One or more of these I bought for free, essentially because I bought enough discs from them over time. But what can I say about the Star TL? Again, in max weight, this is very similar to my Atlas in terms of it'll fly straight, resist turn a little bit, but thus ensuring it flies straight and doesn't do the S-curve bit. It flies straight and then it'll fade. But this is a very trusty disc for me. And I would say it's very similar to a TeeBird in DX plastic. It's also max weight, or maybe Pro plastic. A DX TeeBird is perhaps even a little bit less stable than that. But in my experience, having thrown those, a Star TL is a great disc for someone like me who's throwing 250 to 300 feet when he does his drives, if I throw everything correctly. Absolutely love the TL. Can't recommend the TeeBird Lite enough. That's what the TL means. And you know, this allows me a little bit more stability and a little more trustworthiness in flight. Fights the wind better. Anytime that there's headwind, that I'm throwing into headwind, I'm breaking this out, not these two, because the FD and the Leopard will actually turn and not go as far. This will actually fight wind a little bit better and go a little bit farther if I'm throwing in a slight wind or if the wind is in a different area. Now I'm up to my TeeBird. This is my most overstable driver that I try to throw for distance. If I have greater wind, or if I definitely want to avoid turn, or if I definitely want it to fade hard, or if I want to throw it with a certain type of hyzer and have it cut down. This is also something I've offered, I don't know, $10-12, and because it was an X out, I applied acetone and put my own little label on it, and again, I can just flash it at the camera and people know what I'm going to be throwing. And as you can tell, whereas these are in Star plastic, this is in Champion plastic, so it's even a touch more overstable than, say, a Star TeeBird would be. And I have a Star TeeBird that's also an X out. It's also an X out disc that's also in Star plastic, but it's in Shimmer Star, and it's a brownish gold, and it's hard to see. So I decided to bite the bullet and order a Champion TeeBird instead, and I've not regretted it since. I absolutely love the TeeBird, and if you're a novice disc golfer, I think these 4 discs are the 4 drivers you need to have from Innova and or Discmania. And actually, I would say, you know, these are very close, but this is definitely more stable than this, if slightly so, just in real world usage. And this is significantly more stable than that. And in theory, I could use a Star TeeBird in between the two, but this works just fine for me. Now we're going into Firebird territory. But since Firebird is too much disc for me, as I mentioned in one of my videos a few months ago, I have the Champion Banshee. This is another disc that's in Champion plastic. It's a little bit more stable than the TeeBird, a little more stable than the Eagle, and this is a beefcake. This is the most stable disc I can throw that's a fairway driver and still have it be a sane use of a disc. If I were to carry a Firebird, it would be a tool for me for sure, but it would be useless in trying to get distance from it. The farthest I've ever thrown a Firebird is 200 feet. That's it. Whereas this, I can get maybe 230 feet, which for my level of play is what I need. Whereas this, I can get 250, 260 feet, basically. Oh, fun fact, the farthest disc I've ever thrown was a DX TeeBird at max weight. DX TeeBird. Not Champion, not Star, not Pro. So this is a little more stable than that, but this TL is about where that DX TeeBird is, and that's why I tend to use this the most for max distance. But this is not for max distance. This is for definitely throwing as hard as I can to avoid it turning if I were to accidentally shank, and to resist going right for any reason. Absolutely love the Banshee. I almost never use it because this I've been relying on. And if I go to use my 10 disc setup with my little Innova standard bag, this won't make it in the bag simply because I only have room for 10 discs. But that's what that's for. Definitely a beefcake, definitely for someone that's a novice, something to get that's more stable than a TeeBird and more desirable than an Eagle for that. I do have actually an Eagle I can use in Star plastic, but that is not in my bag due to space constraints, and these do everything that I need to. Last but not least, though arguably least as a driver, is my Dragon in DX plastic. Almost all Dragons are sold at 158 grams, but this one was sold at like 168 grams, and I weighed it to make sure. It's a little bit heavier than your typical Dragon disc, which means it fights turn a little bit better, and I've tried to keep it in good shape and only use it over the water, with the exception of one video that I made, which was a kind of a fun challenge with the DX Dragon and my R-Pro Hydra, where it's just those 2 discs only. This I try to keep in good shape so that it doesn't get beat up, so it doesn't become useless. But if I absolutely have to cross over water, I will bring out this Dragon and use it. Or if I'm anywhere close to water and I feel like I'm going to lose a disc, I will throw this, and Sean and I, one of us will be able to get the disc. Sean, most likely, he's the real retriever here. But that's basically the discs that I have. And so I realize this is a very long video so far, but that's essentially what I have in my bag as far as discs. But there's actually more I wanted to show you, and that is the bag itself. This Innova Excursion Pack is what I used to carry everything else I need as a YouTube content creator. Here's, you know, no surprise, here's where a blender bottle or some other drink canister, canteen would go. Off to the side, there's a place for a phone. There's this little pocket here. I know it's hard to see due to the lighting, but here's a pocket for my phone. It's there. Here's a zip pocket where I have like my keys and wallet and mask. So here's my mask, my wallet, and keys. They go in there, typically. And then on this, and then actually before I go on to this pocket, let me show you what's in here. So here is my Rode wireless mic kit, the transmitter and 2 receivers, or the 2 transmitters and receiver are in here, and this has to be carried along. And the reason why I put that here is because I need to take it out. I keep all that together. Here's the handle to my GoPro. Sorry for the noise on the desk. Here's my GoPro itself. And then Here are the two batteries for the GoPro, and I put all this in here because when I go with Sean, I put it all here so it's easy to get all this out and then assemble it either in the car if he's driving, or when we get there I can then set it all up. Here is the quick charger for the batteries. You basically put the batteries in here to charge up, and then you plug this via USB-C into somewhere so you can charge the battery up. So that's what that is. Here's my glasses. I keep that there, which once I'm out on the course I actually tuck it into there. Here's a little mini that I use. It's a glow-in-the-dark mini. Then here are two rags that I have, two of my Innova rags for discs. And that basically is that. Also here I have a little lanyard here if I want to put my keys there, if I want to put something else there. Okay, last but not least, well actually there's two pockets left, but here's one of them. Here I've got a umbrella. If it's going to be raining that day, I'll bring that and put that in there. Here's one of two disc retrievers that I have. This is the Dynamic Disc Golden Retriever, and this is actually a foam floating thing that will prevent the line from going into the water. Here's another Dynamics Disc Retriever, and this is an extensor that goes out to like 16 feet. It's got a little hook on it, and we've retrieved a number of discs from trees and lakes that way. Like my floaters are easy to find there. And then last but not least are some electronics. Like here's some cables. Here's two USB-C cables that I'll use to charge my phone or the GoPro battery charger. And then here's one for USB B connector for some device. Some phones and other devices will use that. But and then I've got a portable battery in here that uses the USB A connector, and actually this USB B connector can go into this battery, and then it can go up to a wall charger and then do that. But one of the things I will do is have this battery in this pocket, and then I will connect, you know, one of these USB-C cables to here, and then I will connect this battery charger here, and then I'll put one of these batteries. So let's say the GoPro, I'm running it, and then an hour later the battery goes dead. So that I'll put that battery into here, and then let it charge, and then put that in here, you know, put this, you know, like that, put that in there, and then it'll charge while we're using the second battery. So the second battery will drain down, and by the time it's drained down, this will be fully charged, or charged enough for me to use it, and then I can swap the other battery out and have that charged. So I can get a lot of time in terms of uses there. And then last but not least, there's a little pocket here where you put a little rain fly, where the rain fly inhabits. I took the rain fly out, but in here are a number of these lens wipes that I use for cleaning the lens of the camera. That is going to do it. Sorry for this extremely long thing, but I wanted to give you a complete look at what is in my bag, starting with the discs, working out to whatever everything else that I bring in here as a YouTube content creator, and that is going to do it. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great day.